My guest today is Sara Steever of Paulson Marketing. If you want to know where agri-marketing is going, ask Sara. She's already seen it, studied it, and figured out how it's digital. As president, Sara inspires clients, partners, and staff to continuously learn, grow, and innovate. Her strategic vision keeps Paulson on the leading edge of ag marketing, thought digital, and creative leadership. Sara is also the host of Spark, Careers in Agribusiness, a podcast where leaders in ag share advice for a successful career. Prior to taking over the agency reins, Sara was vice president of digital services. She joined Paulson as a graphic designer in 1991. Sara is a graduate of the University of South Dakota and was raised on a row crop and livestock farm in southeastern South Dakota. Because she doesn't have enough on her plate, she and her husband also own and operate a rural bed and breakfast. Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, a podcast all about growing your network and building your brand through traditional and digital networking techniques. I'm Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven and CEO of Marshall Communications. I've been strengthening brands through PR for over 35 years, and now I'm celebrating the success of executives, influencers, business owners, and entrepreneurs from all around the world, all of whom have cultivated their brands and broadened their networks through traditional and digital networking methods. Each week, I interview one of these interesting and influential individuals and provide an opportunity for you, the PR Maven Nation, to gain insights from their strategies and stories. So stay tuned for this week's episode, and thanks for listening. So, Sara, to kick things off, tell us about your career and how you got into it in the first place.
Sure. Well, thank you, Nancy, for inviting me to be on. I'm excited for our conversation today. So I grew up on a small farm in southeast South Dakota, and I was always encouraged by my father, a farmer, who was also a bit of a sculptor. He would get into his machine shed and start welding together sculptures on occasion. I was encouraged by him to become an artist, to pursue my passion for art. And I ended up going to a 4-year degree at the University of South Dakota in fine arts in printmaking. So I was a lithographer for a while. But after I graduated, I quickly realized that I needed to do something a bit more marketable with my skills. So I began, thankfully, found a mentor and began a career in graphic design. So that led me to a couple of different agencies that I worked for, one in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And while I was there, I met a person who ultimately led me to where I work now and an agency that I'm part owner of, which is Paulson. So my career at Paulson, I will celebrate in about 1 week or just a couple of days from now, having been here for 29 years.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? So pretty much my career has been at Paulson, I would say.
Yeah, well, you and I are kind of in the same category because I'm coming up on 30 years since I started my agency, Marshall Communications. So we come out of the same era.
Yep. Excellent. Things have changed a lot since we started, Nancy, haven't they?
I feel that, we are able to, you and I probably know about the traditional methods of marketing and PR and the new methods. And if you were to think about that, do you have a tip, a how-to tip that our listeners could implement right away for PR, marketing, social media, or personal branding?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Well, so in the context of your career, and I think we all are always thinking about that, like, how can I be better at what I do, and how can I stay ahead of the trends that are there? And you just have to have a voracious appetite for learning, in my mind, and not just learning and not doing anything with it, but figuring out what the practical application is for that. So I listen to a lot of podcasts. There's this one podcast, maybe you've heard of it, PR Maven. You've maybe heard of that one. That's a really good one.
I love you. I'll send you a check in the mail, Sarah.
Okay. But I think you have to have a good cross section of information that you're taking in. I think marketing over coffee is a really good one. I've got kind of like a hobby obsession with how search engines work, and so I'm always kind of dabbling in the SEO piece. And I think anyone that's involved in PR and in social, you need to be thinking about all the ways that people come to find your content. And so search engine optimization is a piece of that too. And so I would say just be a great consumer of information, and hopefully you're actually passionate about what you're doing. I see how passionate you are, Nancy, with everything you do. And I have to, in full disclosure, I've attended, the PR 2-day PR seminar that you put on through AMI, and I learned so much. That just made a huge impact on me. And I went back and was immediately able to implement a lot of the stuff in our agency. And we'd really struggled up until that point with where PR belonged, because we're really, up until that point, we're a paid media, and creative and strategy. So to finally add that extra leg to the stool really made us a more stable agency. So thank you for that. But,
Oh, that's awesome. I'm glad that you brought that
Yeah.
up. And we should give shout out actually to Drew McClellan, who owns the Agency Management Institute. And we are both part of a network group, separate network groups, but still networks that Drew runs. And the Agency Management Institute is an organization that helps PR and advertising agencies to manage themselves better and run like a business, because so many of us got into the business kind of as an afterthought. I know for me, I was first and foremost a PR person. I was interested in business, but I really didn't know how to run a PR business. So I learned all those skills. And you mentioned being a voracious learner. I love that expression. And through the Agency Management Institute, we have so many opportunities to learn. I know I've been going to a lot of the content marketing seminars that he's been putting on. And actually, that I went to a podcast seminar that Drew did with Stephen Wessner, and that's what inspired this podcast.
Yep, Steven's got an amazing mind, and if you have a chance to cross him at some point in your career, you will learn so much from him, because he's got such a generous spirit.
Yes, and his podcast is called Onward Nation. And yeah, what you learn is to just share and give away what you know, and people will then consider you to be an authority in your field. And actually, he and Drew recently published a book on authority marketing.
All true. I don't know if this has been your experience, but if you are generous with what you know and are willing to give away what you know, in terms of just knowledge, often I think clients find out once they know about it, they feel like, yeah, I really don't want to spend my time doing that. I have other things I need to be concentrating on. And so oftentimes they'll come back and you end up doing the work anyway. And so it is a benefit to everyone.
Exactly. Well, and for me at least, being in the state of Maine, being part of a network and seeing how people operate their respective businesses in different states across the nation has been really interesting too. And in a lot of ways, I think it has given me confidence that what we're doing here is every bit as good as what agencies are doing all across the country. I'm sure you have found the same thing.
Absolutely. I think talent is not a respecter of geography. So you can find great people anywhere. And my goodness, even in South Dakota, we have this internet that we can tap into where we can learn things. And it's awesome.
I know.
Every once in a while, you still run across some people who maybe from, a big city, and they'll feel like, well, I got to look inside the city here in order to find real talent. And I would say, if anything, we have learned through work, sheltering at home, that talent, it doesn't matter where you are anymore. It really doesn't matter where you reside. We all have access to great information, and it's really more about your attitude and your willingness to work, and again, that appetite for learning and applying, what you learn, sharing what you know.
Exactly. And what I've learned also is when you teach, if you teach something, you learn it even more because you then
Oh, yes.
need to know what you're talking about.
Yep. Nothing crystallizes it in your mind like having to explain it to somebody else. That's for sure.
Exactly. So, Sarah, at Paulson, how do you measure success in PR, social media, and marketing?
Oh, well, we've got, our pretty traditional ways, I guess, of measuring things, which is, we bring everything in through that we can through data, and do the best we can to visualize it and then interpret what we see and do it quickly enough and efficiently enough that we can actually make decisions with it. And, over many, many years of looking at data and measuring things and, kind of living in the world of either Google or Tableau or whatever tool we end up using to visualize it. What we have decided is that we really are going to pare down what we measure to the things that actually help us make a decision. Because there are so many things when you start to dig into the world of analytics, there's so much fascinating stuff and so many rabbit holes and so many things you can look at. But there's really only so much time. And frankly, there's only so much that your clients are going to be willing to pay for you to look at that data. So you really got to get smart about, measuring in a way that actually helps you optimize what you're doing for them. And so, we look at, I guess, how things come together, because you've got many different avenues that you're working on. Social is going to have, a different way for you to look at things. And I would say probably engagement has ended up being the most important social measurement for us, because, how many followers are really engaging with you, and you know, how many people are actually engaged with your brand ends up meaning a lot more than, just a raw number. So I would say engagement's a big deal. And figuring out ways to use that to optimize all the work you do is pretty important.
I agree about engagement. And actually, I've noticed since COVID-19 and working from home and being a little more isolated than usual, that when I interact with a brand and they respond and they kind of recognize me, as being part of their nation of fans, I feel much better than if post a comment and nobody acknowledges it. So, for example, there's a fish market near where I live, and I've started following they've been demonstrating how to make different kinds of fish on their Facebook page, and I've been commenting and sharing what I've been doing, using their recipes, and they've acknowledged back. And um, so I feel like I'm part of their posse now. And so I think that's an important lesson, is if somebody takes the time to kind of join to engage with your content, then it's important to acknowledge them, because everybody wants to be acknowledged.
Absolutely. And I think there are brands, and we had a client in the past that was absolutely petrified of losing control of their brand through social media. And this was, fairly early on when Facebook had come along, and especially YouTube. And I remember pointing out to them, you've got over 5,000 people who have posted videos of themselves with your equipment. And there's this whole world of people we could tap into. And they could not get over the idea that some of those people might do stuff that they wouldn't post themselves. Like, that's all part of engaging with your fans out there, is just letting them be themselves. And they never could get quite past the idea that they wouldn't absolutely have control over everything. And you don't get control over everything, but acknowledging the people that you do have is so important, especially with, I think in some mediums, people feel like that's customer service, right? If I'm getting mistreated by an airline, I'm going to tweet about it because I want a reaction from them, and I know I'll get one. So
Right, exactly. And again, if you are an airline and somebody posts a nasty tweet, if you just respond and acknowledge that, you can understand that they're angry and you want to try to make it right, that goes a long way. And that actually shows other people as well that you care. And that's really one of the most important things about social media is just showing you care.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely a public format, and you can't ignore it. You do at your own peril, for
Right,
sure.
exactly. So, Sarah, do you have some techniques that you've used to build an audience for your brands?
What one of the things that's been most effective for us is just consistency in the content that we develop. And I'm speaking purely as an agency, and I'll just use our world for this example. We started out in 2010, made a commitment to turning what had been just kind of like an occasional blog post that we'd put out to an absolute commitment that we would put together really great content at least once a month, if not more. And then twice a year, we would do pretty significant research or thought papers. And, we have kept that. I don't think we've missed an issue, I guess you'd say, in publisher terms, over that period of time. So for 10 years, we've had a pretty solid and consistent content program. And that's been a great way to build an audience of, thousands now, is just by being consistent and always doing good work and paying attention, to what's happening in the industry and going back and looking and seeing what kind of content gets the best engagement and then kind of building on that. But I would say that audience is a way that you can go out and amplify your content into other audiences. So let's say you decide to start a podcast. You absolutely need to connect your podcast into the database that you've already got. I mean, take that asset that exists already that you work so hard for and put your other content in place there. Advertise the podcast through your email database and then vice versa. So interconnecting all of your audiences, I think, is pretty important.
Yeah, we talked about Stephen Westner, and one of his concepts that he talks about is cornerstone and cobblestone content. So he would
Yep.
consider a podcast to be part of your cornerstone content. And then when you break a podcast into little sound bites or infographics or other little pieces of content, that would be cobblestones. So, and of
Yep.
course,
Absolutely.
at Paulson, I admire you because you really chosen a niche of agriculture and stuck with it. And I think, there's the expression, the riches are in the niches.
Yeah. Yep.
So I admire you for that.
Yeah, that's worked out really well for us, and it was a difficult decision at the time because we actually walked away from a pretty significant client that didn't fit that niche, and if we had stayed with that client, it would have meant hiring a lot more people, and we would have really made a big lurch as an agency into a completely different world. And probably 6 or 12 months after we walked away from that client, due to an acquisition of them, I think we would have lost that anyway. So it ended up being the right decision at the right time. And that's not to say that there haven't been challenges, because if you're too focused in one niche, and that niche goes through a rough patch, that can be, difficult for your agency. So as Drew would say, you want to have some related industries that you're also working in to try to balance things out for you. But that was definitely, from our perspective, it made it a lot easier to have a point of view about your content if we could look at everything that we did through the optic of our clients' eyes and their customers' eyes. So one thing about being in a niche is it does also help you focus your content. And I think we've all learned that lesson, right? That a unique point of view is kind of an important thing to have.
Exactly. I mean, I was talking about that actually with Tanner, who's here with me at the Portland Pod today. That's where I record my podcast. And we were talking today about having a unique point of view and putting your stake in the ground. And it's similar to a coffee from McDonald's versus a coffee from Starbucks, for example. A coffee from McDonald's is kind of a commodity, whereas a coffee from Starbucks is value added and there's value in their brand. So as a person, if you have a unique point of view and you're consistent in conveying information and communicating about that point of view, that's how you make yourself into a Starbucks rather than a McDonald's.
Yep, exactly. There is so much noise out there, and once the idea of content got traction and everybody jumped on that idea, it became just more essential that you got to have something unique to say, or at least if you're talking. I mean, because we're generally speaking talking about marketing, you've got to have a unique optic to that to make it interesting and to make it stand out.
Well, I'm so glad this whole concept of content marketing has become a thing, because I'm thriving on. I just love creating content, whether it's writing columns for Forbes.com or publishing books or podcasts, or for me it's almost like a game. And after all these years of being in this profession, it's kind of opened up all sorts of new opportunities for me. So
yeah. Well, so coming from the art side of the world, I guess one of the lessons that I really learned that you probably knew, were talented for instinctively, Nancy, is the ability to communicate. So you may not necessarily be able to go through your whole career just communicating visually. For me, or or as an account service person, almost everyone needs to be able to have the skill of writing. And that's especially true these days with the importance of content, just like you said.
exactly.
You at least came by it naturally, Nancy. Some of us have had to learn it the hard way.
Yeah, I think I was talking the moment I was born.
Yeah.
My poor mother. She had to listen.
You just sit down, start writing that down, kid.
Yeah, right. Well, we're going to continue our conversation shortly, but I want to share some news about the PR Maven podcast listener line. You can now call in to 207-620-9075 and get in touch with me to ask me questions, share feedback or ideas for the podcast, including who you'd like to hear on the show as future guests. So I look forward to hearing from members of PR Maven Nation. And I also want to announce that I recently published my new book on Amazon.com called Grow Your Audience, Grow Your Brand. And you can order that on Amazon.com. There's a paperback version and a Kindle version, and I'm soon going to be recording an audio version here at the Portland Pod. So stay tuned for that. So we'll be right back in a moment with more from Sara Steever, and stand by.
Do you want to grow your client or customer base? Perhaps increase brand awareness? Maybe tell your unique story more effectively? Of course you do. But you may be worried that you don't have enough expertise to make that happen. Well, no worries, PR Maven Nation. Let the PR Maven herself, Nancy Marshall, show you how easy it is to get your message across effectively using a powerful yet simple tool, a message map. Nancy's training is often called informative and constructive, well-designed and impactful, with a perfect blend of theory and real-life experience. You will leverage Nancy's expertise to create your own message map when you register for this comprehensive online video training course, which is broken down into 4 easy-to-understand modules. Normally, this course is priced at $147, but for listeners of the PR Maven podcast, that's you, PR Maven Nation, it's only $29 when you enter the code word podcast during enrollment. It even includes a workbook and bonus content to guide you through the process. So go to prmaven.com and click on the Message Map Mastery course to enroll today. Remember, enter the word podcast during enrollment for a special discounted price of $29.
Welcome back, and today we're talking with Sara Steever, who's president of Paulson Marketing, and I'm going to dive right back in with more questions for Sara. How have privacy changes impacted your ability to grow client audiences, Sara?
Oh, I think it's probably made us pay attention to something we should have been paying attention to a long time ago, which is that our clients really need to be building up their own assets in terms of data. And I think privacy laws are going to continue to clamp down, even though I think a lot of consumers feel like it's getting more, it's getting worse for them. They're wondering, am I being recorded every time I talk on my phone? And all of a sudden I see a banner ad. And I think consumers feel like their privacy is completely out of control. But we know on the marketing side of this, it's actually getting kind of ratcheted down for us. And so we are really looking and encouraging our clients to collect their own first party data. And what the things that we have done to encourage them, and it's not just, make sure you've got a good solid list of email addresses that you can communicate to, but you need to get that cookie data, and you need to get your own first party data, and you need to build some of those audiences. And I think you could make the case that a Facebook audience or a Google Analytics audience is rented still. If Facebook goes away, then that audience goes away. But at least it's something that you can build on your own and tap into when you need it. So I think for our purposes, the evolution has really been build your own assets. And that'd be my advice to everybody. You cannot rely on third-party data anymore the way you used to, or you do at your own peril.
Well, and the other thing is to build your own list of email addresses rather than to depend on your lists that might be embedded in Facebook or Instagram or even LinkedIn, because of course you don't own those lists. So if Facebook went away, all of a sudden you would be kind of left empty-handed if you didn't have your own email list.
Yep, and I think it's good to use what you've got and dump that back into Facebook and build a list there, and use the technology that's there while you can to build, to drive people back to your site and to build your email list, just like you're saying, Nancy. I think that is absolutely critical. You've got to own your own data.
Absolutely. And some people would say that list of email contacts is one of the most valuable assets in the business. Actually, I think it might be Stephen Wessner who says that, and you've got to really treat that list with respect and sort of tend to it like a garden.
I think the other thing to think about it, and it's for me a big stretch to have gone from being an artist to thinking about things like data hygiene. But you do have to think about the technical aspect of that list. And we're big advocates of cleaning it every once in a while. You need to run it through a service and make sure you've gotten rid of your things that might impact your sending score, because you really don't want to get dinged in that respect either. And you really don't want the people that aren't meaningful anyway. I mean, it's maybe painful to think that you lose 10% of your list because you ran it through a cleaning service, but really not doing you any good anyway. And you have to learn how to talk to your clients about that, to say, that's what good data hygiene means. We want the best people, and we actually want live people and not bots.
Well, that's a really good point, to conduct some data hygiene. And I could see no better time than during this COVID-19. We all are kind of having a little pause in our businesses and time to think about the future. And I think now might be a good time to make sure there's no coronavirus in our databases.
Yeah.
Clean that right out.
Yep. Get your house in order, and make sure you're CCPA compliant and GDPR compliant, and whatever the next one is coming. It'll be good, I think, to get those privacy laws made more consistent so that you don't have to worry about something else cropping up that you weren't covered for. And I know a lot of the clients that we end up working with may not be Fortune 100s that have, that are the target of things like GDPR, but still you want to make sure you're doing the best you can by your clients. And a lot of the platforms that we use, we're a big fan of SharpSpring and love their marketing automation product. Those are already GDPR compliant. So that helps along the way too, but you still have to, make sure all your client websites are buttoned down.
Well, I'm glad you brought up SharpSpring. That's a company that I like a lot. When they were trying to develop us as one of their clients, they bought us free lunch and gave us a presentation over lunch. And I thought that was a very nice way for them to introduce themselves to my team.
Well, the funny thing is they've never traveled to South Dakota to come and see us. So, but we're still big fans. I
Yeah.
think they've got great customer service.
Well,
I just can't say enough good things. And what I actually really appreciate about them is that you can make a feature request and they'll get it in queue. And a lot of the things we've requested over the years have come to fruition. So that's been wonderful.
that is great again, that sounds like a good example of engagement. They're engaged and incorporate their clients into their product development.
Yep. Super smart company. Great people.
So, Sara, most successful people have a network of fans and followers, either online or in person or both. How have you built your network of fans and followers, and has it been a conscious goal or has it happened on its own?
Well, it's mostly my mom, that's a big fan. So.
Me too. My mom is also my biggest fan, although she has no idea what I do, really.
Let's keep it that way.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I think a lot of us start out not necessarily being intentional about building a network. I know I didn't start out being intentional about it. And then I had a great mentor, Greg Guzzi, who was one of my partners here at Paulson and was a past president, who's since retired. And he just really hammered into me that it's about the relationships. It's going to end up being about the relationships. And if you think about it, no matter what you think you're going to accomplish on your own, if you can be the most brilliant person in the world, and if you can't hold up the ends of the relationship aspect of being a human being, you're really not going to achieve a whole lot. And so I think being intentional about building a network is good. And we have so many tools at our disposal, like LinkedIn, right? It makes it really easy to quickly connect with people. But is that really a meaningful connection if you're not going to actually have some sort of, and I'll use the word engagement there too, because I think it's appropriate. If you're not going to have some form of engagement with those people, is that really going to achieve all that much for you or for them? And so I think being always willing to be helpful, much like Stephen Wessner would be, is a great way to build engagement with people in your network. And I think you have to be intentional in picking out who you want to engage with. And not necessarily because it's beneficial to you. I think being beneficial to other people is going to be what opens the door to that all coming back around to you again. And then just always being respectful of how you treat people. And if you can, I'm a huge believer in actually attending events and going places. I'm pretty heartbroken because my favorite conferences have been postponed. And now I think I'm a little bit worried that maybe they're not going to actually happen this year. But there's nothing quite like face-to-face networking, and you just got to get over yourself and dive into the mosh pit, and set reasonable goals. You don't have to meet 50 people just because you went to a networking event. Try to meet one person. Try to meet one or two people and have a meaningful conversation. And I think that'll go a longer way to building a network than work in the room per se.
I agree. And I also agree that when you meet someone in person, it's good to connect either on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook or somehow on social media so you can extend the relationship and stay in touch.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, a great way to think about it too in terms of being intentional is it takes work to keep a healthy network together. It's really not, I'm always shocked at how many people I'm linked up to on LinkedIn, and like, there's no way I can keep up with the 1,600 people I've connected with over the years. So you really, you do have to have some focus to it to have really meaningful engagements with people.
Yes. However, I think one of the benefits of being connected to those 1,600 people is if for some reason they couldn't remember your name or my name, for example, but they remember something about you. They might remember that you are from South Dakota or that you are in agricultural marketing or some aspect. It makes you more findable. And that is, I think, one of the purposes of connecting on social media is being more findable if someone can't remember your name.
Oh, that's an awesome point, Nancy. That is an absolute awesome point. It does tell you how many times I use the search function on LinkedIn because I can't remember who that person is that I wanted to engage with again. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, so being findable is an important reason to use social media, and you talked about SEO, like that would be SEO for your own name in a way.
Yeah. Yep. And I think we could probably spend a whole another podcast talking about personal branding, but I think that's a piece of it too, is, being a little bit memorable in a good way, and consistent to your brand, and
Right,
just being
exactly.
a good person.
Right. Yes. So, Sarah, in your line of work, is there a resource such as a book, a website, or an app that you have found helpful, and why?
There's a gobs and gobs as a voracious learner, but I think just one book that I feel like has been tried and true over the last 3 years, just as a macro trend, is a book called Tilt. And it talks about shifting, and can be manufacturing, it can be marketing, it can be really in any industry, but really shifting the way you think about your company and your strategy from the products and services you produce to the customers. So moving closer to them in how you think about them. And it's, I think I pick it up maybe once a year and kind of thumb back through it again, because and I'm really realizing how the predictions of 3 years ago have really come to fruition here. And you gave the example of Starbucks earlier, and I think that's one of the examples that they would probably use in the book, is just moving away from the idea that you're selling coffee to selling the experience to your customer. So it's a great book. Tilt. It's called Tilt.
Cool. I'll have to check that one out. And I like the fact that it talks about selling an experience, because, that's one of the basic tenets of branding, is to think about curating the customer experience and make that experience repeatable every time, because that's one thing that people like, is sort of the comfort of knowing that when they call your business, they're going to get, the phone will be answered the same time. They'll get the same level of service and the same brand experience. And that's what will, again, make you more memorable.
I think on the manufacturing side, especially, all of the margins have been squeezed out of what you can do, through lean manufacturing and all of those standards. It pretty much squeezed all the margins out of that. And so if that's the niche that you're in, if you move closer to your customer, then you're going to know, well, hey, my customer's bigger problem is, how did they dispose of the container that I just shipped that thing in? There's a problem there. And are there problems that I can solve for my customer because I've gotten closer to them and I understand them better, that can actually make a differentiation point for my company? So there's a lot of it's just a great book all the way around. It made me think a lot differently about my clients.
Cool. I will definitely check that one out. So, Sarah, is there a parting thought you'd like to share with PR Maven Nation today?
Oh, well, I would just like to say I am so excited that I've had this chance to visit with you again, Nancy, and how much I had learned from you, back in the Disney campus, and how much I've had an opportunity to bring that forward to my agency. And I guess I would just tell people, don't miss an episode of this podcast. That's my parting thought.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that so much.
Yeah.
And I admire what you've accomplished in your business so much. And again, how you've put your stake in the ground, literally, or your stake in the garden of agriculture. And I've enjoyed our relationship, and I look forward to working with you in years to come.
Very good. Well, thank you for having me on the show.
Sarah, what is the best way for people to get in touch with you if they want to follow up?
You bet. You can email me at Sara, and that's no H, so SARA @paulson.ag, short for agriculture.
Yeah, I think that's awesome that you grabbed that email address, .ag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's actually, I think it's the country code for Antigua or something.
Oh.
Yep.
Well, that wouldn't be bad either
for us. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you being with us today, Sarah, and I hope everyone in PR Maven Nation has a great day. That's it for this week's episode. I'd like to thank you for listening, and if you feel that you've gotten value out of today's conversation, consider leaving a 5-star review on iTunes or whatever app you're using to tune in. If you haven't subscribed yet, you should do so. I release a new episode each week, and subscribing will make sure you get an alert when there's a new episode. You can also join the PR Maven Nation by going to prmaven.com/nation and clicking join. It's free, and it's a great community of like-minded individuals who are all looking to learn and grow from one another. If you have an Alexa-enabled device, be sure to add the PR Maven Marketing Minute to your daily flash briefing menu. Thanks again for listening, and have a great rest of your week, PR Maven Nation.